It's Saturday Morning 101, and we are in the middle of a series of talking about the Saturday morning essentials. Now, a lot of people might be asking, Johnny, you've been on the Krofft shows for a couple of weeks now, and at the end of the day, it's going to be 5 weeks that we will have been talking about the Krofft shows. Next week, we're going to end the Krofft segment of this series with the best of the Krofft shows, Land of the Lost. But we've talked about HR Puffin stuff, Lidsville, Sigmund and the Sea Monsters last week, and as Dave has reminded us week after week after week, his favorite was Dr. Shrinker, and Dr. Shrinker, in his opinion, had the best theme song. But what we're talking about this morning is the Krofft Super Show. Now, for those of you who don't know, I'm going to bring up my Wikipedia pages here, because the Krofft Super Show was an hour-long show that basically packaged together other shorts from the Krofft creations. There were shorter shows, and it was hosted by this rock band, Captain Cool and the Kong. And can I just say that outfit with the guy in the leopard print fedora and I need that costume. I want these costumes. I love Captain Cool and the Kong when I was a kid. And you know what I did not know, Dave, is that the character in between Captain Cool and I forget his name, but the girl in the middle with the curly hair, that is the character of Nashville, but she was played by Louise Duarte. And I had no idea Louise Duarte was on this show. And she was one of my favorite comedians. And I actually got to share the stage with her a couple of times. I had no idea that she was a part of my childhood. She's a great comedian, a great impressionist. She does a phenomenal George Burns impersonation of all things. Yeah. She does a whole bit as George and Gracie. But anyway, Captain Cool and the Kong, they were the hosts of the Krofft Super Show. They would do musical numbers to open the show, to in between the different shows. And I believe, and Dave, you might know this, I believe that they did most of the theme songs for the shows themselves. And I did not know this. They actually were all real musicians, and they actually performed live. There's a video of them doing concerts at Six Flags in Atlanta, Georgia. And they put out a record, they put out an album. It was a whole thing. But the shows on the Krofft Super Show included the Buggaloos, Electra Woman Dyna Girl, Dr. Shrinker, Bigfoot and Wildboy, Wonderbug, and the redheaded stepchild of all of them, Magic Mongo.
That was pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, and I did forget, did I not load it up here? The Lost Saucer. The Lost Saucer.
I don't remember that one.
Yeah, so let me see if I can get this image up. So, Willow.
Yes, sir.
So, the homework this week was just, I sent the link to all of the intros, all of the show's intros, and then I just gave you loose instructions to just kind of follow your nose down the rabbit hole of the Krofft Super Show. So, what were your first impressions, and did you do any further research? Did you watch
I watched
these episodes?
I watched the show. it's very colorful. Although, okay, going back to the picture of the group.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, it was Huggy Bear's costume inspired by the pimp costume at all? Because that looks very much like what Snoop Dogg wore. And
well, so it's funny. Those costumes are especially inspired by the pop band ABBA.
yeah,
This is what ABBA was wearing.
I
And
thought it was more glam rock, like T-Rex and Gary Glitter and those folks.
well, wasn't that a little bit later though? This would have been 1973.
Yeah, the glam rock was kind of in its infancy, but I think that they were partly inspired by that movement.
Okay.
And I know that over the seasons, Captain Cool and the Kongs did change their look a bit.
Yes. Yeah. And the show itself ran only 2 seasons on Saturday morning, and then it was repackaged for weekday syndication as the Krofft Superstars, and that's how I remember it. Because I was 3 years old when it was on Saturday mornings, but it would run in syndication until 1978, and that's how I remember these shows. And
so
it's funny.
either they were very inspired by Starsky and Hutch around that time, or
Yeah, the guy on the left does look very Eric Estrada, doesn't he?
Yeah, well, that was just the fashion of the day. I mean, the pop fashion of the day.
Yep.
You had ABBA, you had the glary glitters, you had Earth, Wind, and Fire, Kiss to some degree. Wearing these outlandish, outrageous costumes, and I personally, I think it's fantastic, and
and the leader very much sounded like John Travolta in Grease.
Well, so and all of that is intentional, Willow. See, as we work our way down through this list, none of these shows are exactly original in concept. Like, let's talk about the Buggaloos. The Buggaloos were a band of fairies, and again, they were all real musicians, real singers and instrumentalists, and they had this band in their what was the fairyland called? I forget, but and they would play musical numbers. And this show, when they were casting it in the UK, was touted as the British Monkees. So it was inspired by the Monkees, which was inspired by the Beatles, and the first Monkees knockoff that the Krofft brothers did was the Banana Splits.
Mm-hmm.
But they created the Buggaloos, and I still remember the theme song. The Buggaloos, we're in the air and everywhere, flying high, flying free as a summer breeze. I've sung that song all my life, and I've remembered it since I was a child. But Willow, the standout star of this show, was the legendary comedian Martha Raye as Benita Bazaar. And that was kind of the signature of these Krofft shows, wasn't it, Dave? That the villains were really the most memorable characters.
Yeah.
I mean, with Lidsville, Charles Nelson Riley.
Yeah.
And with Puff and Stuff, Witchy Poo, Billy Hayes, they were and Martha Raye was the same way. Now, does anyone remember what else Martha Raye was super famous for?
I do not.
She did the denture commercials, the Polydent denture commercials.
Oh.
Yeah, and she was also a regular. There's a theme here. She was also a regular on The Gong Show and Hollywood Squares. So, Martha Ray as Benita, and the whole plot, Willow, was Benita Bazar thought that she could be a big super pop star and be a superstar, and she just needed the right band to back her up. And she hears the Buggaloos playing the music, and she goes and she asks them to be her backup band. They refuse, and so like every supervillain does, she kidnaps them and forces them to play on her record.
Huh.
Dun dun dun.
And that's how we all got our start, was getting kidnapped by a villain and forced to do jobs.
Yeah. I don't think you're wrong, Dave. I think there's some truth in that. And then
But
go
I
ahead.
do have a couple of costumes to show off here, if I may.
Okay. You know how to share your screen?
I'm going to try.
So Brad.
There we are.
Okay.
All right.
Go ahead.
Speaking of a captain with a spoon,
Oh, there's your Captain Crunch.
Captain Crunch.
cosplay.
This was my first costume I ever made by myself back in the 80s.
All right. Awesome.
That is really well done.
Thank you.
What'd you make that hat out of?
A poster board.
Wow.
Yep.
And since we're going to be talking about Dr. Shrinker, here's my mini-me.
Yeah.
Nice.
So Brad Parnell says the Buggaloos was the second show by the Kroffts back in 72. It wasn't part of the original Krofft Super Show, but it was in the reruns you mentioned. None of the research I did supports that statement, Brad. Everything that I found has it connected with the second season of the Krofft Super Show. I'll have to dig a little bit deeper, and same with the Lost Saucer. Every reference has it premiering on the Krofft Super Show. So I'm not going to say you're wrong, but anyway.
Yeah, like I said, I don't remember Lost Saucer, but I do remember Far Out Space Nuts.
Yeah, Far Out Space Nuts was kind of side by side.
Yeah.
And also on the Krofft Super Show was Electra Woman Dyna Girl. We did a whole episode about them in our first or second season. Electra Woman was played by Deidre Hall, and they were kind of the female equivalent to Batman and Robin, and definite heavy inspiration off Batman and Robin and the Wonder Woman phenomenon that was on CBS television. A little bit of the Charlie's Angels vibe with their chief who would send them on missions. And I always loved this show, Dave. This was one of my favorite Saturday morning shows.
Yeah.
And do you remember who did the theme song? Electra Woman and Dyna Girl, fighting all evil deeds. Cyndi Lauper.
Wow.
Really?
Yeah.
That amazes me.
Yeah.
Because this was, what, 6-7 years before She's So Unusual came out?
Yeah. Well, longer than that. This was like 1973.
Okay.
72, 73.
Yeah, you're right. That was only the first season. That's right. So 10 years probably.
Yeah. So before Cyndi Lauper was Cyndi Lauper, she did the theme song and she wrote it and performed it.
Oh, wow.
And she was famous for doing it live in concert at her concerts. And there's a performance of her doing it just like a year or two ago in a live concert.
Cool. I've never seen her in concert. I'm very sad, even sadder now.
Listen, she sounds great. She looks great.
Mm-hmm.
I swear she's discovered the fountain of youth. She doesn't look like she's aged a day. I don't know how she's done that, but love Cyndi Lauper. All right. Also part of the Krofft Super Show was Dave's favorite. Dr. Shrinker. Dr. Shrinker. And Dave, you have said that you felt like this had the best theme song of all of them.
Yeah, Electra Woman Dyna Girl has a good theme song, but this is the one that always stuck with me.
Yeah, all of them on the Krofft Super Show had a really good theme song. And I would put that up there. But, I didn't like this show, Dave. Dr. Shrinker scared me.
Mm.
And I did not like watching this. Because, look, this guy looks like an evil, deranged, mad scientist.
It looks like Vincent Price's cousin, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he looks like something out of a Hammer horror movie. Right?
Yeah.
And that's definitely the vibe they were going for.
Mm-hmm.
And, I never really understood the point of the show. He shrunk the 3 teenagers, and he shrunk them and was trying to catch them. And that was every episode. I chase the shrinkies and fail. I chase the shrinkies and fail. What does it all mean?
Well,
that was actually,
in a way, this was the inspiration for the Smurfs.
Yes, it was. Because he is definitely Gargamel.
Yeah.
And Billy Barty played his assistant, and Billy Barty was the Azrael to Dr. Shrinker.
Yep.
And
Billy Barty was also the cameraman in UHF, which is fantastic. I love that one. I mean, he's been in tons of things.
Yep.
But Dr. Shrinker and UHF are the 2 things that I remember him the most for.
See, I loved Billy Barty in Willow, and he was also the wizard that replaced the part of Orko in the Masters of the Universe movie.
Okay.
I think he was called Grindolf. But I'll tell you, Dr. Shrinker and his assistant, played by Billy Barty, freaked me out as a kid. And is it my imagination, or did Billy Barty always look like an old man?
He
Even
always
when he
looked
was a
pretty
young
old.
man.
Yeah.
I mean, he was born in 1932 and lived until 2002. And always looked the same. All right. This was my favorite.
I think his high school picture, he probably could have cast for a teacher,
Yeah, I think you're right. So, Willow, out of those 3 that we've talked about, did you watch any episodes of those?
Oh, just what I saw from the Super Show.
Well, I'm gonna.
I can't say which one is my favorite because they all just kind of had they all. I'm not a huge fan of these kid shows. I'm gonna be honest with you.
Well, they were all really designed to capitalize on more popular trends of the day.
Yeah,
I love Sid and Marty Krofft stuff, but they really didn't create a lot of truly original concepts. And you're going to see that more in just a moment, because one of the biggest episodes on television in the 70s was the $6 Million Man 2-part episode with Bigfoot. And Sid and Marty Krofft were like, ooh, Bigfoot. And they created Bigfoot and Wildboy, which I was absolutely over the moon about this show when I was a kid.
Okay, that Bigfoot costume is actually well done. I will have to say,
really well done. And when you watch the show, you really can't tell it's a costume. It's spooky good.
Yeah, it was made from human hair by Master Wigmaker.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, the $6 Million Man, Bigfoot. You know who played that one?
Yeah, it was Andre the Giant. And apparently, let me see if I can bring it up here. The actor that played Bigfoot in this was an Olympic high jumper. Both of the actors were athletes, and this was the first and last shows they ever did. Ray Young played Bigfoot. He was an Olympic high jumper. Joseph Butcher was Wildboy, and he was a decathlete, a hurdle runner. And you remember, yeah, they did get their own show. That comment, who was that commented?
It was Brad Parnell.
Brad Parnell.
They did get their own show. So there were 12 episodes on the Krofft Super Show, and then they got another, I want to say 14 episodes of their own show in 1979. So the original Krofft Super Show episodes were in 1977. Then in 1979, they got their own show. And listen, I loved Bigfoot and Wildboy, and I really, really, really wanted to be Wildboy. So the whole theme of this show, Willow, was that Wildboy was a lost child that Bigfoot found and became like a foster parent and raised him. And strangely enough, Wildboy could speak perfect English and could speak Bigfootese.
So it was, sorry, I almost said George of the Jungle.
Watch out for that tree.
Tarzan.
It had a very Tarzan-esque feeling, but it was all to capitalize on the popularity of that $6 Million Man Bigfoot episode.
And actually, going back to your 6 million, 2 actors played Bigfoot. The other one was Lurch, Ted Cassidy.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. Interesting. We're learning so much this morning. Also part of the Krofft Super Show was The Lost Saucer, starring Jim Nabors and Ruth Buzzy. And basically, you guys, this was Lost in Space.
Mm-hmm.
These two were they were like cyborg aliens who crash landed on Earth, and they kidnapped this little boy and his babysitter. And look, the bridge of the saucer is almost identical
That's
to
very
the Lost
Jupiter
in
2,
Space.
yeah.
And the design of the saucer was definitely Jupiter 2. And I wouldn't be shocked, actually, if the Kroffts were sued by the producers of Lost in Space, because it was so remarkably similar.
Mm.
The chess pieces are like the chess pieces on
the robot.
The robot.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just, guys, come on. And this was actually my least favorite of the show. And again, Ruth Buzzy, she was a comedian. Again, well known for her appearances on Hollywood Squares and The Gong Show.
She was my first crush, I'll tell you.
Was she really?
Yes.
You know, I watched an episode of this week because I couldn't remember if Jim Nabors, changed his accent or not. And he did not. He had that Gomer Pyle accent, and, we're just on a lost saucer floating through space, and it really took me out of the whole environment.
Shazam.
Yeah. So, and then, Dave, do you remember Wonderbug?
Vaguely.
So Wonderbug.
There were a number of cartoons that did similar things, Speed Buggy and stuff like that. And I vaguely remember Wonderbug.
Yeah. So again, very similar to Speed Buggy. And they came out at the same time.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure a lot of people would confuse the two. But
and Herbie the Love Bug was what, late 60s?
Yeah. Yeah.
And Herbie had, 3-4 movies, I guess?
Yeah, and again, yes, you're absolutely right. Inspired by Herbie, and I'm sure Speed Buggy was inspired by Herbie too.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole concept here was this junkyard heap of a car called Schlepp. When they I think they honked a magic horn,
Mhm.
kind of like Frosty the Snowman. When they honked the magic horn, it turned into this super human anthropomorphic car, Wonderbug, which was super fast and could fly through the air.
A bit like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. That was
Yes.
written by, do you know?
No, I don't.
Ian Fleming.
Ah!
Chitty Chitty Bang Bang is the same universe as James Bond, potentially.
I love that. I love that. Well, so here's a fun trivia about Wonderbug. The junk heap car Schlepp was actually sturdier and better built than the supercar.
I believe it.
The actors said that they had to be so careful when they were on this prop not to break it.
Mm-hmm.
But the junkyard car was like sturdy as a rock.
Well, that's because they couldn't afford George Barris.
Well, I'm going to have to take off, folks. I've got to head out, see Suzanne, and then all the rest of my fun day. So I'll catch you guys on the next box.
All right. Thank you for joining us, Dave. It's been a lot of fun. Everybody follow Dave at davemattingly.net, and we'll see him around at shows this summer and catch you on the back of the cereal box.
Next week, I'll be at Lexington Comic-Con, so see a bunch of folks there.
Whoop, whoop, whoop.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. All right, Willow, we got to talk about one last show on the Krofft Super Show.
Okay.
This one I had completely forgotten about until I started taking a deep dive, and that was Magic Mongo.
Uh-oh. Yeah.
He was a genie that they found in a bottle washed up on a beach. Now, in the opening credits, they're playing volleyball, and the ball gets hit out of bounds, and the guy goes to run to get the ball, and the ball has landed beside this old bottle. And instead of grabbing the volleyball to continue the game, he decides, oh, there's this old bottle. I'm going to grab that instead and show everybody what I found on the beach. How unrealistic is that? Forget the fact that it's a genie's bottle and Magic Mongo is a genie that, you know, wiggles his ears physically to make magic happen. He decides, rather than continuing the game of volleyball with his beautiful friends, to pick up this old nasty bottle on the beach.
Clearly not the smart one of the group.
No. No. And Magic Mongo was just a goofy genie. And here's what really disappointed me. They had such potential to actually use real magical effects, a real magician but instead they used, you know, camera cuts and, you know, cheap special effects. That show could have been something really special, but instead it is on the heap of forgotten shows. So Brad Parnell says Lenny Weinreb, who played Magic Mongo, was a prolific voice actor and was also the voice of Puff and Stuff. Ah, okay. All right. I did not know that.
He also said that Ruth Buzzy was great on Laugh-In.
Yeah, I'd forgotten she was on Laugh-In as well, along with Goldie Hawn and some other great classics. Yeah, Ruth Buzzy was a super, super funny person. And she's probably rolling over in her grave that we're talking about her appearances on The Lost Saucer. I don't know.
She didn't like that. She didn't like being on that show.
Well, so here's the thing. So for a lot of these actors, they had fun on the Krofft Super Show, but it was also nearly the death of their careers. Like a little bit of trivia. Phil Collins auditioned to be the grasshopper Bugaloo, the blonde.
Oh, wow.
And he didn't get the part. And he later said, "Thank God I did not get cast in that show, because these musicians never went on to do anything else." And the character played by character of Joy, who was played by Caroline Ellis, and Caroline Ellis was singer dancer. She was a brilliant ballet dancer. Really never did anything else of consequence. Now, that having been said, there was a comment from Brad about Captain Cool. The guy who played Captain Cool, I mentioned Joyce DeWitt, Louise Duarte in The Green. Captain Cool was played by Michael Lembeck, who was the son of Harvey Lembeck, who was Eric Von Ripper in The Beach Parties. But Michael Lembeck would go on to have a career in soap operas. So,
Okay,
yeah. Some of these folks had careers beyond the Sid and Marty Krofft Super Show, and most of them were the people who played the villains, like Martha Raye and Billy Barty. But a lot of these people, never did anything else after this. This was their first and last credit. And I picked this show as part of our Saturday Morning 101 as an essential, because I think it's important for people to be familiar with the Krofft Super Show to really understand how trippy the 1970s really was. Because these shows set the stage for things that were to come later. Sid and Marty Krofft set the table for the Muppet Show to have the popularity that it had. Sid and Marty Krofft really revolutionized a lot of techniques that would be advanced in other shows and TV and movies, special effects and whatnot. They came up with the original ways to do them, and then other filmmakers enhanced them and improved them. Yeah. So, and they gave us some great Saturday morning villains. One of the things I was always super disappointed about, and if there's anyone else watching and you can raise your hand, I was always super disappointed that Electra Woman and Dyna Girl never teamed up with Bigfoot and Wildboy. This was a team up waiting to happen, dying to happen, and it never happened. And I was always super disappointed. And I'll tell you, they've tried to restart the Electra Woman and Dyna Girl franchise 2 other times. There was a TV movie with Marky Post playing Electra Woman, and then there was an Amazon Prime movie that came out 3 or 4 years ago that really went nowhere.
Wait,
but
Marky Post, was that before her Night Court days?
Mm-hmm. Yep. But she was already a star before she even came on Night Court. But anyway, Krofft Super Show, it is a piece of 70s nostalgia that I think is definitely essential.
Said that nicely.
So I did not know. That the music of the Kongs was actually written by the Osmonds. I didn't know that, and I didn't find that in my research, Brad. You're giving me some stuff that I'm going to have to go take even deeper dives on. I think the Wikipedia entries are not quite up to date. But you know what? Now that you say it, it sounds like something the Osmonds would have written. And Brad agrees. It was a blast being a kid in the 70s, and Sid and Marty's shows were a huge part of that. That's exactly the reason I have spent so much time talking about the Sid and Marty Krofft shows. And that's why next week we're going to talk about what I consider the absolute best of all of them, and that is Land of the Lost. And Willow.
See, part of me wishes I lived through that with you guys. I was born in the early 80s and got to experience it, but being up in Canada, I had like all these other TV kiddie shows that to live through, and I'll touch on that later on. But one of them is Sharon, Lois, and Bram, who had dance with the giant elephant. So clearly that was very reminiscent of the Krofft creators.
Yeah, and look, it shaped a lot of what was to come. And, like Dave said, Dr. Shrinker was basically the Smurfs before the Smurfs. And you see the influence of the Kroffts in everything after. And I love what they did and what they were still doing as late as 2019. So, by the way, I went and I watched that updated, rebooted version of Sigmund and the Sea Monsters on Amazon Prime. Not a bad show. Definitely a kid show.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely kept the spirit of the original Sigmund and the Sea Monsters. And was a lot of fun, but definitely written for kids.
Yeah.
So, Willow, your assignment next week is to watch Land of the Lost.
Okay.
From the 70s. It is on YouTube, and you're going to love it. It
okay.
really was outstanding. And when you watch Land of the Lost, you are going to see the foundations for so many other things that came after. The stop motion photography, the animation that they did with the dinosaurs, the puppetry, the costuming. They took a giant leap from silly kid show to serious high stakes family drama. And I think you're going to really like it and really dig it.
Okay.
So all of those of you watching, that's your assignment as well. Check out Land of the Lost, and then join us back here next week when we'll talk about it. And that will end our segment, our series on the Sid and Marty Krofft, and we'll get back to traditional animation. But I hope you've enjoyed this trip back in time, Willow.
You know what? I did, because I liked seeing what other shows were inspired by. I love costumes as a cosplayer, and I like just seeing what other people grew up with, because it kind of gives me a look into other people's childhoods. I mean, like, I've had Canadian television, as boring as it is now. We had some really good stuff during my childhood, and it's stuff like that like shows like Mr. Rogers has inspired shows like Mr. Dress Up, and Ernie Combs actually worked with Mr. Rogers. So
you know what? After we finish the Saturday Morning 101 series, I do want to come and talk about Canadian TV, because Mr. Dress Up is such a huge phenomenon in Canada, and I don't think people understand what a big
There's a
influence
reason
he was.
why I'm a cosplayer. He was the reason why I became a cosplayer, because the whole idea of having a trunk full of costumes and playing dress up as an adult.
Yeah. And he was in his late 50s, maybe 60s when he was doing that.
Yeah.
Today, some people might frown on that, but
and we had the Friendly Giant, things like that.
Yeah. We're going to do a whole series on Canadian Saturday mornings just for you. And one last comment from Brad Parnell. My favorite costumes of theirs, talking about the Krofft brothers, were the banana splits, which they made for Hanna-Barbera before they started doing their own shows. That's right. And by the way, did you realize that on almost all of these Sid and Marty Krofft shows, the characters were, they were produced by the Krofft brothers, but a lot of the characters in a lot of shows were actually created by Joe Ruby and Ken Spears, who were responsible for so many more of the Saturday morning cartoons that we're going to talk about in the next segment of Saturday Morning 101. Ruby Spears cartoons. They did Fang Face. They did Thundar the Barbarian. They did so many others that we're going to get into. But it's so funny how the cartoon universes, the Saturday morning universes, are so closely knit between the Kroffts, Ruby Spears, Hanna-Barbera, and we're going to get into more of that, Brad. Thank you for joining us and adding to the conversation. We really appreciate it, and please make sure you come back. Now,